Welcome to Rediscovering the Beatles with Mark Morse. I'm Mark. Today I thought we would talk about, I was in a live chat recently with some vinyl collectors. I think the chat was hosted by All the World's a Stage. I just came in at the tail end of it, and they were talking about what's going to happen to all these records, after they move on or we move on. And I'd mentioned that I was lucky because my daughter had taken interest in record collecting, and so I knew at least I knew where my Beatle records were going to go. She might not be interested in the other ones, but I thought she'd be interested in the Beatle ones. And I was talking about how I write little notes to put in the inner sleeves and stuff. So if something should happen, she could see, oh, this album is important because of this, or this was important to him because of this. Another way to do that was just to be doing it on video. And that's kind of was something I had in the back of my mind when I started this channel anyway. But I thought something fun to do was to introduced the first 3 records I ever bought with my own money and the stories behind them. I think there'll be some surprises in here for you. So let's get started. The very first album I bought was in 1975. This album came out in February, I believe, of that year. And I was 12 years old when I bought it. Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare. And this is the actual album. I've had this since I was 12 years old. It is in terrible condition. The inner sleeve got destroyed, and I replaced it with another sleeve. I mean, this is in really bad condition. The record kind of shows that. But when I gave away all my record collection in the 1990s, I held on to about 40 albums that I just couldn't get myself to part with. I couldn't part with the first album I had ever bought. This is what started me on my odyssey. Before I got into records, I was into horror movies and science fiction movies. In Iowa, they had a creature feature. It was called Acre's Creature Feature with Chuck Acre. He presented these monster movies and sold aluminum siding, I believe. But I was really into that scene. I just loved the monster movies. I loved staying up on Friday night, staying over at my friends, or my friends staying over with me and watching Creature Feature. So Alice Cooper fit right into that motif. My brother-in-law at the time, they lived about a block away from me, actually the next block over, but we'd just cross the field. And I would cross the field and I'd go over to his house and my sister's house, and he would play these records for me. I fell in love with Alice Cooper right away. I just loved the theater of it. And then when Vincent Price's voice came on here, I knew that I had found something special. So back in the day, I'm such an old man, but back in the day, I would get $1 a week. My dad would give me a $1 a week. My duties were pretty light. I took out the garbage and I put the trash liner back in. That's really all I had to do. And the regular stuff like listening to Mom and that kind of stuff, turning down the music if I was too loud. But records were just a little over $5 at the time. I would have to save for 6 weeks to get a record. And so I saved up. And then there was a department store in town called Arlen's that sold records. I couldn't get my mom. She wasn't going out that way. She wasn't going to make a special trip. So me and my little brother, we trekked on out to Arlen's, several miles away, went by my friend Tony Rash's house, got him, drug him along too, and I bought this record. And it was just a wonderful thing. I realized pretty quickly how cool my mom was, because I'm not sure who was on the other side of the phone, but I was listening to her talk. I think it was one of my sisters, but none of them will fess up. And they were obviously saying stuff like, Alice Cooper's not a good person for Mark to be listening to at his age. And I heard my mom saying, I'm proud of him. He saw something he wanted, he worked for it, he saved up for it, and he got it. I don't think it's bad that he is buying his own stuff with his own money. And I knew then that my mom was super cool. I have tons of memories associated with this, just tons of them. One of the things I would do, my mom worked nights, and most of my brothers and sisters were away from the home. And if my dad was out, it would just be me and my little brother. And one of the things I loved to do is I would turn off all the lights in the house and I'd play this. I'd play the song Years Ago and Steven, and walk around like a zombie. And he was a couple years younger than me. Scared the hell out of him. My mom had a number where we could call her at, and he would call her up. And he would hand me the phone and says, Mom wants to talk to you. I'd get on the phone, and my mom would say, turn off that record and stop acting like you're dead. So that was just a funny memory. So this was my first album. The second album probably won't surprise you, but it was Sgt. Pepper. And it was probably 6 weeks after buying that one, because it took me another 6 weeks to save up enough money. So if you're not familiar with this album, it's the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was kind of big at the time. I've said this in a couple other videos. When I was a kid, I'd sneak up into my brother's rooms, and I just loved looking at this album. And I would read the words. I was just fascinated by the colors. Everything about it was fascinating to me. And then in the gatefold, by the way, this is the same album too, so it's been with me forever. I saw Paul McCartney, and I decided that was going to be my look. Convinced my mom to let me grow a Beatle haircut. For some reason, I knew there was a song on here called When I'm 64. And I knew I liked that song, and I would play that song over and over again when it was my brother's record. And one time I got lazy, it went into Lovely Rita, and then Good Morning, and then the Lonely Hearts Club Band reprise, and then A Day in the Life. I ended up playing the whole album over and over and again. And then about this time, my brother who owned most of these records was college age, went off to college. I didn't have these records accessible to me anymore. So I saved up and I bought Sgt. Pepper. That was my second album. And Beatles have been pretty much my favorite band ever since. The third album is a little odd, just because I was probably turned 13 by the time I got this one. This is Neil Young, Time Fades Away. Oh, the lighting is terrible for this album, but this was a big departure from me, because I love the theatrics of Alice Cooper. I love the kind of horror monster theme. I love the just melodic sound of the Beatles. This was totally different. If you've ever heard this album, Neil Young touring, I think he was touring in 1973. I think that's when this album was released. Just a live album. His voice is... I can't describe his voice. It's very raw. It's very human, and it was a big departure for me just because it didn't have the melody or the the monster theme of these other two. But I remember my brother playing this when I was smaller, and I just remember asking him. I said to him, "Why does he sound like that?" Because Neil Young's voice is definitely something. When you first hear it as a child, you don't really understand it. I definitely didn't understand it, but I was fascinated by it. And my brother explained how right. I guess now I'd call it form as an extension of content, but that's not how he explained it. He explained it as the voice is genuine, it's real. So I actually got into Neil Young before. By the time I heard Bob Dylan, I was prepared for Bob Dylan's voice. I love Bob Dylan, but I love this album. If you ever get a chance, if you haven't heard it yet, Neil Young himself, I don't think particularly likes this album. It was during a tough time in his life. And the tour was just alcohol fueled. I think Neil Young was really into tequila at the time. There's a lot of stories around this album, most of them kind of sordid and sad. So I don't think he particularly loves this album. I remember when Decade came out, his kind of retrospective, and none of the songs from this were on it. I kind of thought to myself, I don't think Neil likes that album, but it's always held a place in my heart. So those are my first 3 albums I ever bought that started me on my odyssey. These are all ones I've saved since I was 12, 13 years old. So I've had them with me. I'm going to be 62 here in a little bit. So I've had them for several decades. They're in horrible shape. I would never play these on a good turntable because when I first got albums, I was not somebody who took care of them. I'd stack the records. I would put, like, if the record would skip or jump, I would stack the quarters on top of it to hold the needle down. All the horrible stuff you're not supposed to do. But I've never been able to part with these things. They just hold a very special spot to me. I do not remember what I bought after this. I'm sure it was probably more Beatles or more Alice Cooper, more Neil Young. It's actually probably Simon and Garfunkel. I really liked Simon and Garfunkel too. But I just thought I'd tell the story of my first 3 records that I could remember. And if you can remember your first 3 records, man, I would love to see those in the comments. And Lexi, if you ever get these records, that's why they're important to me. You can still take them to the Lexi on it. I live in Iowa. There's not a record store probably within 80 miles of me. But Lexi and her husband live in L.A. now. They moved there a couple months ago, and she lives right across the street from 2 big record stores. So she's going to go out and take some pictures of records for me, and maybe I'll post some pictures of Lexi with some cool records out in L.A., and she's a lot prettier to look at than me. So